Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and I will continue to read my writings to entertain the living heck out of you, at least until the fall of 2021. Beyond that, we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much for watching, and here we are in part 3 of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers ebook novella War Stories Book 1. Which gives the story of what several members of the USS Da Vinci crew were doing during the Dominion War, which was chronicled in the last 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Previous 2 parts gave us what Dr. Elizabeth Lenz was doing on the USS Lexington, which was rather brutal. This is a battle that was actually originally mentioned in Book 3 of the series by Christy Golden, which was called Hard Crash, which had mentioned some of that, as well as some other background that was provided in Glenn Howman's Oaths. And I sort of tied it all together into that story. This next part, we had established that there was a linguist as part of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers team, Bart Faulwell. They also had a background in cryptography, which is a valuable skill during a war, and this is his story. So, without further ado, here's part 3 of War Stories, Book 1. Starbase 92, stardate 52601.6. Bartholomew Faulwell had been sitting outside Commander Duvall's office for 2 hours. He had kept himself occupied by reading one of the books he had loaded onto his pad. It was what he had intended to use to read himself to sleep that night, of course, but he could always get his hands on another one. And it was a good read. A historical novel about 21st century space travel by a very talented woman named Elmira Vanderweer. Bart had also read many straight histories about so-called boomers in the days before the Federation's founding, and Vanderweer was one of the few fiction writers who captured the essence that Bart had found in the histories. Portraying the frontier spirit that was easy enough. Pretty much every halfway decent novel set in that time period managed that, but few were able to leaven it with the very real hardships they endured. Then again, in our replicator age, hardship is a tough one to handle. Though I suppose the last couple of years have cured us of that little bit of complacency. Of course, Bart would rather have been doing something productive with his time. Since the start of the war with the Dominion, Bart had been applying his skills as a cryptographer to cracking Dominion and Cardassian codes. With the entry of the Breen into the war, he assumed that his sudden reassignment to Starbase 92 had to do with their codes. So he'd hopped the first runabout he could get on and reported to the station commander immediately upon his arrival at the large top-shaped station that orbited Calufrax 4. And then he waited. Finally, the doors parted and a very short, balding, round human came out. He didn't so much walk as waddle. "You must be Faulwell. Come on in." Then he turned and went back into his office, obviously expecting Bart to follow him. No apologies, no pleasantries, just ordering him in. This is going to be fun, Bart thought with a sigh as he got up, turned the display of his pad off, and followed the commander into his domain. Said domain was fairly utilitarian. Usually, Starfleet officers tended toward a minimum of decor, enough to show that there was a person occupying the space, but not enough to scream out their personality through interior decorating. It was the enlisted folk, like Bart himself, who tended to make their working spaces over into their own image. Duvall, however, took the former to an extreme. There was nothing here that didn't belong. The standard issue desk with the equally standard issue view screen computer on it, the 2 guest chairs, the computer display on the wall, and damn little else. No pictures, no personal effects, no wall hangings, nothing. "Have a seat," Duvall said, even as he fell more than sat into his own chair. "My orders," Bart said, "were to report here right away, but not why." "Of course not," Duvall said after snorting derisively. "I won't kid you, Mr. Faulwell. There's a war on." Bart bit back a sarcastic response. It didn't do to antagonize one's commanding officer within 5 minutes of meeting him. Duvall continued. "You probably don't know this, and once you leave this room, I expect you to continue to not know this, but the war is going pretty badly for our side." In fact, this was common knowledge, but again, Bart refrained from comment. "With the Breen's damned energy dampener keeping us and the Romulans out of the battle, we have to rely on the Klingons to hold the border. Now, between you, me, and the viewport, there's nobody I want next to me in a fight more than a pissed-off Klingon, but I want him backing me up, not going out in front. No discipline, if you know what I mean. And the numbers just don't add up." He leaned forward, hitting Bart with what might have been a penetrating glare on a face that wasn't so, there was no other word for it, chubby. That's where you come in, Mr. Faulwell. Now more than ever, we have to rely on knowing where the Dominion is going to attack. Unfortunately, they've upgraded their code, and we can't figure it out. Your job is to crack it. Bart nodded. Of course, sir. Don't give me that of course, sir, crapola, mister. Look, I know your type. Type? Yeah, you non-commissioned academic types. I read your file. You enlisted 17 years ago to want to go on one of those long-term exploratory missions. Probably figured you'd meet lots of nice little alien life forms that we could make friends with. In fact, the 7-year mission of the USS Pisces was meant to do exactly that, and they made several first contacts, at least one of which was on its way to Federation membership. Bart had joined Starfleet specifically for that mission, serving as the ship's linguist, but he found that he enjoyed the challenges Starfleet had to offer and re-enlisted when his term was up. Well, this is the other side of the coin, Mr. Faulwell. This is the real deal. The Federation's counting on you to come through. Are we clear? Unable to resist, Bart said, So clear I can see right through you, sir. Excellent, Duvall said with conviction. That's what I want to hear. You'll be heading up a team of crypto specialists. I understand you worked with some of them. Your liaison to me will be Lieutenant Commander Anthony Mark. In fact, he should be here. He stabbed angrily at the control on his desk. Duvall to Mark. Mark here. Why the hell aren't you in my office, mister? A pause, then slowly. I've received no orders to report to your office, sir. Well, you do now. Get your posterior over here, Commander, and I mean now. Our crypto spook is here. Spook? Bart thought, but didn't pursue it. He just hoped Mark would arrive soon. When he did, about a minute later, Bart tried to keep his jaw from falling open. Since he was a teenager, Bart had always had a physical ideal in his head for the perfect mate. In the 40 years since, he had yet to find anyone even close to that ideal, which, he supposed, accounted for his appalling lack of success with any kind of long-term relationship in those years. The person who walked into Commander Duvall's office fit most of the criteria of the ideal he had created in his head at the age of 15. Tall, but not too tall. Curly blonde hair, but not too curly. Hazel eyes, long fingers. The only thing missing was a beard, but looking at Lieutenant Commander Mark's face, Bart saw that a beard wouldn't look right on that face, as opposed to Bart's own. He had no appreciable chin, which his slightly scraggly brown beard nicely covered up. If he likes swimming and Vanderweer's historicals, I'm going to start believing in fate. About time, Duvall said, though Bart couldn't imagine on a station this size that Mark could possibly have arrived any sooner. This is Faulwell. He's the new head of the crypto project. So you indicated, sir, Mark said in a deep voice. I'll escort him to his quarters and call a meeting of the staff for 1900 hours. No, can't be at 1900. I have a meeting with Admiral Koike at 1900, and he'll want a progress report. Make it 1700. Sir, it's 1705 now. Duvall blinked. It is? Yes, sir. Damn it! Where the hell did the day go? And, sir, Mark added, Novak and Throckmorton won't be back from Starbase 375 with the updated files until 1830. Bart frowned, wondering why files had to be brought by hand. Then he realized it was probably for security reasons. Subspace communication wasn't always safe. If it was, Bart mused with a small smile, I'd be out of a job. He also, as Duvall had indicated, knew at least one of those names, assuming it was Roxana Novak, to whom Mark referred. Until the war, she had been on the staff of the Tamarian Liaison's office, trying to further contact with the children of Tamar, a race who spoke purely in historical metaphor. She had done some excellent work in determining how the Tamarians developed their singularly peculiar form of communication, and Bart was grateful to have her on the team. Duvall pounded the desk with his fist and stood up. Damn it, what the hell kind of chicken outfit are we running here? Sir, you can tell the Admiral that everything's under control, that our team is together, and that they will work hard to crack the code as soon as possible. We need it sooner than that, mister, if we're going to win this thing. He sat back down. All right, have the damn meeting without me, if you think it'll do any good. But I expect a full report and transcript, and I want progress reports from both of you twice a day. Understood? Bart stood up, taking the phrasing as a dismissal. You'll have those reports, Commander, I promise. I better. Dismissed. If you'll come this way, Mr. Faulwell, Mark said, indicating the door to Duvall's office with his hand. As soon as the door shut behind him, Bart said, Let me guess, you deliberately set the meeting for 1900 because you knew he had that meeting. Mark sputtered a laugh. Was I that obvious? No, but he was. Yeah, well, he's not as bad as he seems. Mark chuckled. In fact, he couldn't be as bad as he seems. But he's a very good administrator, and he's run this place phenomenally well for the last 10 years. It's just... What? Bart prompted. He's got Starfleet in the blood. Mother was Starfleet, grandfather was Starfleet, all 4 great-grandparents were Starfleet, all the way back to 61. Mark didn't need to explain which year ending in 61 he meant. Everyone knew that that was shorthand for 2161, the year the Federation was founded. But they all had pretty impressive careers. Ship captains, war heroes, historic first contacts, that sort of thing. All he's done is distinguish himself as a bureaucrat. And then a war hits, and he finds himself on entirely the wrong end of it. Bart nodded as they entered a turbolift. Starbase 92 was about as far from the front as possible, which was why so much important crypto work was being done here, away from the fighting. Habitat level. The turbolift started to move horizontally. So he makes up for it by doing the tough guy military act. We'll make sure he feels properly appreciated as the last line of defense against the Dominion, and everyone's happy. Things actually run pretty smoothly here. The lift started to move downward. So, who all is on the team? I assume Novak is Roxana Novak? Mark nodded. Terrence Throckmorton is her partner. They've been working together since the war started. He grinned, a bright smile that seemed to light up the turbolift. I also think that he's going to ask him to marry her if he doesn't beat her to it. Bart returned the grin. Always good to know some of the gossip going in. The others are Tellura of Vulcan. Good. Bart had never met the woman, but her work on translating the notoriously difficult Breen language had been invaluable. Gannerus Frebington. A Naelish, his knowledge of sibilants in particular might be useful in this sort of work. Bart had met Frebington a few times and found him off-putting and not nearly as talented as he himself thought he was. And Janice Karasis. Blinking, Bart said, Karasis? She's still alive? Again, Mark grinned. If you're very nice to me, I won't tell her you said that. Yeah, she's still alive. 165 and still going, well, not strong, exactly. She spends more time in the infirmary than any other single place, but her mind's still as sharp as ever, even if her body's breaking down on her. The lift came to a stop and the doors parted. So, what's the problem with this new code? Hell if I know, Mark said with a shrug. I'm just the liaison officer. All I know about language is that my universal translator mostly works. Fair enough. Here we are, Mr. Faulwell. Please, it's Bart. Hell, if you want to be formal, it's Dr. Faulwell, but that just makes me feel like a stuffy old academic. He grinned. Of course I am a stuffy old academic, but that doesn't mean I want everyone to think I am. Bart it is, then. And I'm Lieutenant Commander Mark. Or Sir. He held a straight face for about a second. Or, hey you, I answered to all 3. Hey you it is. Where's the meeting at 1900? The wardroom. The computer can direct you. Great. Thanks, Commander Hey you. Mark shook his head. You're welcome, Bart. Three weeks later, Bart Faulwell and his team were no closer to a solution than they were when they started. The meeting on Bart's first day hadn't taken too terribly long. Everybody introduced or reintroduced themselves to their newest boss. Novak and Throckmorton were truly a pair, finishing each other's sentences and talking over each other. Tellura said very little, but her few comments were incisive. This was in direct contrast to Frebington, who had several dozen ideas, only some of them worthwhile. And then there was Janice Karasis, a frail old human woman who looked like she would keel over at any second. Bart was sitting in his quarters, going over the latest sample Starfleet intelligence had provided, these from the few Klingon ships that had survived the attack on Avenal 7. They'd been working for days on end with no progress. Bart hadn't realized that running this team would mostly consist of playing den mother to a bunch of opinionated specialists. Bart had always enjoyed to research for its own sake, and for the intellectual rewards you generally got at the end. This group, though, was more interested in justifying their own pre-existing theories. Frebington mostly expounded on his own ideas about everything, whether or not they related to reality. Karasis spent most of her time poking holes in Frebington's theories. Not a difficult task, as Bart had encountered Swiss cheese with fewer holes than the Naelish's ideas about cryptography, but Karasis applied herself to that particular task with special glee. And Novak and Throckmorton were in their own world and had to be repeatedly reminded that there were 4 other people involved. Tellura was the only one who had been easy to work with, as she shared with Bart the love of research for its own sake, though naturally she didn't express it as overtly as Bart did. Mark to Faulwell. Only when he almost fell out of his chair, startled, did Bart even realize that he had fallen asleep at his desk. Bart had always preferred to work at his own pace and simply catch naps where he could, but Commander Duval did insist on a more rigid schedule, and the rest of the team was already locked into it, so Bart was stuck with it as well. It was playing merry hell with his admittedly eccentric circadian rhythm. Faulwell here. What can I do for you, hey you? Bart, no offense, but that joke stopped being funny the first 800 times. The next words came out of Bart's mouth unplanned. Tell you what, meet me for dinner tonight and I'll stop. All right, then, it's a date. Bart blinked. Then he blinked again. My God. He said yes. He was already in shock at himself for asking in the first place, which he chalked up to exhaustion, lowering his resistance, but Mark actually said yes. Bart, you there? Yeah. Let's say we meet at that chill restaurant at, he checked the chronometer on his desk. 1930? Will do. Great. That's not why I called. No, you called to remind me that Duval wants my evening report in 10 minutes and I better get it to him before he gives me the evil eye. His eye isn't evil. It's just misguided. Even so, I'd rather it wasn't guided at you. Not to worry, Commander. Hey, you. He'll have it on time. I even made sure I spelled all the words right this time. You said you'd stop that if I met you for dinner. Mark's voice sounded mock petulant. You haven't actually met me for dinner yet. I know you officer types, always making promises to us enlisted folk. I want proof. Mark laughed. Fine. I'll see you at 1930. The problem, Bart said, between mouthfuls of the yellow leaf salad that the Trills called Grackish, is that there isn't anything to work with. Anytime you've got a code, there's some kind of base for it, something to build off of. Every Dominion code up until now has had similar algorithms at the root, or at least similar enough that we could extrapolate something. And sometimes we've been lucky enough to stumble into things, and sometimes they've been careless. But this latest one, it just doesn't match anything. No mathematical or linguistic pattern we've seen before, from the Dominion, from the Breen, from the Cardassians. It's a big mess. Sounds it, Mark said, leaning back in his chair, having long since finished his meal by dint of not being able to get a word in edgewise. I'm sorry, Bart said sheepishly. I've been talking shop all night. Mark grinned. That's all right. I would have just spent the whole meal bitching and moaning about Commander Duval. This is a nice reminder that other people have problems too. Yeah. Bart took a bite of his Grackish. Maybe the Dominion's come up with an unbreakable code. Well, no such thing. Remember, if there's no way to decode it, there's no way the other side gets the message. Of course, it could just be something straightforward and simple, and we're overthinking it. Bart chuckled. Overthinking is definitely an occupational hazard with this bunch. Well, I hope for my sake you come up with something soon. Duval got a very terse communique from Admiral Ross today, and, well, let's just say that the abused tend to kick downward. Bart gave Mark a sympathetic look. I'm sorry, Commander, but Mark laughed. What? Commander? Well, I can't call you Hey You anymore, I promised. Mark nodded. Fine. Fair enough. Anthony will do, I think. Fine. Anthony. Bart speared the last of his Grackish with his fork. Actually, one of the more famous unbreakable code stories was from Earth. The Second World War. One side's code kept being broken by the other side, so instead of an actual code, they transmitted everything in an obscure language by a people they'd conquered over a century earlier. That code was never broken during the Bart cut himself off. My stars and garters. I think that's it. What's it? We're complete and total idiots. He got up. I've got to go. I may have stumbled onto the right track. Mark grinned. Then we both have to go. He tapped his comm badge. Cryptography team, please report to the wardroom immediately. And to find out what Bart's talking about, tune in next week for part 4. Thank you very much for watching. Please check me out online at DeCandido.net. There's a link there for a Kickstarter, which is still going for the rest of this week. About another 5 days or so. It's for a new anthology called The 4 Somethings of the Apocalypse, or The 4 Whatevers of the Apocalypse, or The 4 Question Marks of the Apocalypse, whatever you want to call it. It's alternate takes on The 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Instead of that, we have The 4 Cats, The 4 Lawyers, the 4 emojis, the 4 lunch ladies, the 4 PTA moms, the 4 septuagenarians of the apocalypse, the 4 development executives, the 4 customer service representatives of the apocalypse, the 4 Karens of the apocalypse, and so on. From a whole bunch of really cool authors, including Jonathan Mayberry, David Mack, Peter David, Patrick Thomas, Derek Tyler Attico, Mary Fan, Daniel Ackley McPhail, Dayton Ward and Kevin Dillmore, Peter David, I may have mentioned him already, David Mack, Jody Lynn Nye, Lorianne Gilman, a whole bunch of others. Lots of really cool people contributing stories to this. You should definitely check it out. It's being supported on Kickstarter right now. Lots of cool bonuses and stretch goals and other fun stuff. So if you go to DeCandido.net, you can find a link to it there. Excuse me. At least if it's before June 20th as you're watching this. If it's after June 20th, it's too late, but hopefully we're funded and you can just buy the book. Anyway, you can read my blog at decandido.wordpress.com. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. And tune back here next week for part 4 of book 1 of War Stories. Thank you very much. Please stay safe.